Okay, GCSE Human Fieldwork Paper 3. Now, this is the human fieldwork, remember, so don't start writing about vegetation cover and light and all of that malarkey. This is the human work, land use questionnaires. Remember again, all of the sample assessment materials have asked people to state the title first. So remember the title, examine the impact of urban change in Pangbourne on its service provision since 2008. And you'll see that at the top of every slide. That's the title. And in fact, we have some hypotheses to look at. First data presentation technique is the table. We've got land use services, main reasons for visiting, and then perception of change. And you'll see a weakness already when we think about evaluating the fieldwork that you did, because the historic data from 2008 didn't include this particular question. Notice the land uses that were services 2008 to 25, 2018 30 may only be 5 big services, but actually it's a very significant percentage increase. Okay, remember you need to remember dates and you need to remember some numbers so that the examiner gets the impression that you were there, and after all, you did gather the data that we're presenting to you here. Okay, second data collection technique, presentation technique are bar charts. And it doesn't matter if it's a 3D bar chart, it's just a bar chart. Red 2018, blue 2008. And these are the rice pots. Now, rice pots is a well-known acronym for the land use survey technique that you used. Many of you spotted a weakness in it, in terms of some of you may include shopping in commercial, others in service. But that's for you to critique. And you get valuable marks for being able to criticize the method and the conclusions and the limitations of the conclusions. By far and away in both years, you can see over to the right services, and you can see some significant differences in terms of residential change, more in red, less in blue. Let me go through on the left-hand side some of the key points, but you can read these for yourself, and you can also access this slide show from the link that your teacher can provide you. So, several key changes in land use over the last 10 years. Number of residential has increased from 5 to 12, so more than 100% increase. The number of services has increased from 25 to 30, as I've mentioned before. Both of those you can see here. Okay, notice open spaces has gone down, for example. What the data does not show is the type of services. And here you've got to understand the difference between high and low order. Low order, frequently visited, not much money at a time. High order will be things like national banks and more significant high order services. So further investigation and comparison of the primary and secondary data suggests a loss in high order services such as banks and building societies, and many of you will have seen that happen in your time in the Pangbourne area, and also a rise in the number of low order services, hairdressers and cafes. I'll say no more. What can we conclude? With regard to services, there has been a significant change over the last 10 years. Nice, simple conclusion. Third data presentation technique for you, the pie chart, one of our favorites. Here you've got the pie chart for 2008. Here you've got the pie chart for 2018. And here we're looking at perception. And this is the answer to the questionnaires that were taken and brought together about people's reason for visiting Pangbourne. The blue is shopping, the red are services. And you can see that despite there being a rise in services, as we've seen from our previous slide, there you go, just over here, rise in services. In fact, we can see that more people are now coming for the blue, for the shopping. So you could just remember 50% are now for the shopping, just over 25% for the services, whereas before it was just over 25% for shopping and well over half for services. So you can begin to see some really important things. Anything about meeting people? Interesting that meeting people is increased. Perhaps, of course, that's one of the functions of the cafe. Again, simple explanations for each of these. What does it say under here? Most popular reason for visiting Pangbourne is for shopping and services. Service use has dropped from 60% to just 30%. Analysis, fall in percent accessing services gone up, despite the total number of services going down. Number of services gone up, total visiting for services has gone down. Interesting, because of course, low order, it might be they're going more frequently. So if we look a little bit more, what are the main purchases you're planning to make? Food, coffee is very specific, and then haircuts and various other things. So food is the biggest purchase at Pangbourne. Other low order products also feature, and interestingly, the purchase of high order products such as dentistry or optometry were very low. Okay, so high order service provision, you don't go to Pangbourne. Low order service provision, you would appear now to go to Pangbourne. And again, that feed into the perception of the area? Really interesting type of graph, various different names for this, as a polar graph, a radial graph. The important thing is that where you see the red line, you get a higher, in this case, how has the loss of banks associated with perception of Pangbourne? So this is another type of graphing methodology. And the further out the red goes, the higher the respondees. So most people, 90% of respondents, said that the loss of high order services has affected their position in the village negatively or very negatively. So negative rather than positive. So if it's up to the top left, then it would have been very positively perceived change. Down towards the bottom, negatively perceived change. So we've got a real conclusion to draw here that people, in fact, are perceiving Pangbourne negatively because of the change in services. And it's worth noting down here that younger respondents tended to err towards no different, whereas the older ones were negative. Perhaps they remember what it was like when the banks were here and they could do everything in place. Of course, there's a reason for those banks going, not least because things like banking have now moved online, whereas haircutting, I can't imagine, has gone online. You can correct me on that if you like. I'm not a frequent flyer when it comes to hairdressers. Conclusion. Perceived perception of service provision Pangbourne is a negative one. Okay, remember that the original title, Examine the Impact of Urban Change on its Service Provision since 2008, in particular looking at perception. This is despite the fact that the volume of services in the village has actually increased over the last 10 years. Therefore, it's clear that it's not the amount of services which has an effect, but it's the order of those services which affects people's perception. Cool, done, easy. Evaluation. Now, this is the sixth strand, as you're about to see in the next slide, of how the AQA could examine this piece of fieldwork. And I put together 4 things here. When you're asked to evaluate, just try and remember to evaluate the method that you chose and to evaluate the conclusions as well. Okay, so I've put a few points down here. Better historic data would have helped the analysis. Remember, all the way back to the beginning, we didn't have the 2008 perception of how things had changed. A couple of questionnaire weaknesses, perhaps. Limited questions on the backgrounds of respondents. We could have dug in a little bit more about the people that we're asking questions of, and also the potential answers that we were offering to people when you did the questionnaires. So we could have redesigned the questionnaire, but it's not a bad thing to criticize your field work. Secondly, land use survey weaknesses. Some people find it difficult to interpret the rice pots, and numerous people stopped me when I was sitting outside one of those coffee houses and asked me, where do I put shop? Where do I put estate agent? And not everybody asked, and therefore not everybody would have put them in the same place. And that meant that the broad range of services were often grouped together. So we didn't actually have a fine definition of high and low order. But remember, this is done deliberately because evaluating fieldwork is just as important, in fact, as carrying on the fieldwork. And finally, sampling weaknesses, the timing. Who's in Pangbourne Village at that time of the day? Are you going to get a certain, let's be generous, age sector that are there being questioned, so to speak? Many respondents elected not to take part. Some of you told me about those that you scared and they ran away. Some others were fed up because you were the third group in and they'd already answered the questions once. And also, those of you who mixed in the local traders and the pedestrians would have got very different perceptions, and we didn't subdivide those in our analysis. So finally, there are the 6 sections down the sides that you could be asked questions about, and here's your summary of the things that have gone into it. I won't go over them again, but you can pause this video if you like, have a look at them, or go and access the slideshow. Good luck, and remember, the more you can reference specific data, specific things about Pangbourne, including names of shops, the more likely it is the examiner is going to give you credit in any of these questions on the 6 sections.